The house was too clean. That was the first thing Vivian noticed when she came home from her night shift at the accounting firm. Not the silence, not the darkness, not even the empty coat hook by the door where Adrian's jacket always hung. It was the smell of lemon cleaning spray and the kitchen counters wiped so thoroughly that the faint coffee ring she'd left that morning was gone. Adrian hadn't cleaned the kitchen once in 11 years of marriage. Not once. She stood in the front hallway of their home in Oakville for a long moment, still wearing her winter coat, her briefcase hanging from one hand. The digital clock on the microwave read 11:47 p.m. Her breath made a thin cloud in the air. He'd turned the heat down again, something he did when she wasn't home, always claiming she kept it too warm. She set her briefcase down slowly. She told herself it meant nothing. He'd probably had someone over. One of his colleagues, maybe. Maybe he'd been embarrassed by the mess. Maybe he'd finally decided to help around the house the way he used to, back when they were first married and living in that cramped apartment on Lakeshore, when everything felt like something worth taking care of. She told herself a lot of things in those days. Vivian Alcott had met Adrian Pierce at a tax law seminar in downtown Toronto in the autumn of 2013. She was 31, recently promoted to senior accountant at Meridian Consulting Group, and she had shown up to the seminar slightly late with coffee still in her hand because her previous meeting had run long. Adrian was presenting. He was the kind of man who filled a room without trying, tall, unhurried, with a voice that made even depreciation schedules sound deliberate. He'd caught her eye when she slipped in and given her the smallest smile, the kind that felt like a private secret, and she had spent the rest of the seminar thinking about that smile instead of taking notes. They got married 2 years later in a small ceremony in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Her mother cried. His parents flew in from Calgary and shook her hand with both of theirs. It was, by every visible measure, a good beginning. For a long time it was. Adrian made partner at his law firm 3 years into the marriage. Vivian was promoted to Director of Financial Services the same year. They bought the house in Oakville. 4 bedrooms, a double garage, a backyard that backed onto a greenbelt. They talked about children in the way that people do when they mean it, but keep finding reasons to wait. They took a trip to Portugal for their 5th anniversary. She remembered standing on the tiled terrace of their hotel in Lisbon at night, looking out at the city lights, and thinking she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She couldn't identify the moment things started to shift. That was the thing nobody told you, that the unraveling didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with a dramatic scene or a slammed door. It arrived in the texture of ordinary days, in the way Adrian stopped asking about her work, in the way he began taking calls in the backyard and coming back inside with a particular expression on his face, composed and distant, like a door that had just been closed and locked, in the way he began referring to her, almost imperceptibly, almost politely, as though she were a detail in a meeting agenda he'd already moved past. She noticed all of it. She said nothing, because she had learned somewhere along the way that noticing too much was its own kind of problem. She kept the books balanced, at work, at home, inside herself. And she waited for things to even out the way they always had before. They did not even out. The name came up for the first time 8 months before that night. She came home to the clean kitchen. She had not been snooping. She wanted to be clear about that, to herself at least. She had never been the kind of woman who went through her husband's phone, or checked his messages, or sat in the driveway listening for the sound of his voice through a window. She had been raised to believe that trust was something you extended fully or not at all, and she had extended it, fully, for 11 years. She had been looking for the property tax bill. Adrian had always handled the bills, not because Vivian wasn't capable. She had a master's in financial management and could price a tax liability in her sleep, but because it was the kind of domestic territory he had claimed early in their marriage, quietly, the way he claimed most things. She was looking through his desk drawer in the home office for the municipal bill, because it hadn't come up in their joint account, and she wanted to make sure it hadn't been missed. She found the bill, and underneath it she found a hotel receipt. Four nights at the Hilton Hotel on Yorkville Avenue. A week ago, Tuesday. Adrian had been in Mississauga that week, or so she'd understood, at a conference on commercial litigation. She stood there with the receipt in her hand for a long time. She put it back exactly where she found it. She went downstairs. She made herself a cup of tea and drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the backyard in the dark. Then she opened her laptop and she started doing what she had always done when something didn't add up. She looked at the numbers. It took her 6 weeks to understand the full shape of what she was looking at. She was good at this, better than anyone Adrian knew, better, she suspected, than Adrian himself gave her credit for. That was the irony of it. He had spent years quietly diminishing her professional assessments in conversations with his colleagues, calling her risk-averse, overly cautious, saying she was good with spreadsheets but not with strategy. She had let it happen. She had told herself it was just how he talked, that he was competitive, that it didn't mean anything. But the same precision he'd condescended about was exactly what let her see what he'd been doing. There were transfers, small, regular, spaced apart just enough to avoid standing out. A holding company registered in Ontario that she hadn't known existed. A condo purchased 18 months ago in the Distillery District, title in a name she didn't recognize, Sylvia Kern. She found Sylvia Kern's name in 3 places after that. On a shared utility account, in the CC line of a forwarded email Adrian had accidentally left open on the shared laptop, and in a public Instagram account with photographs that confirmed, without any possible misreading, exactly who she was. Sylvia Kern was 34. She had dark hair and a wide smile, and she worked in commercial real estate. She had posted a photograph in late October of herself standing on a balcony, city skyline visible behind her, lake in the distance, with the caption, "Home is where your heart is." The balcony Vivian recognized was the balcony of the Distillery District condo, the condo that was registered in Sylvia's name but that Adrian had paid for. With money from their marital assets, Vivian closed the laptop. She sat very still at the kitchen table for what felt like a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called her university friend, a woman named Patricia, who now worked as a family law partner at a firm in Burlington, and she said, quietly and precisely, "I need to understand what I'm looking at before I do anything, and I think I need to do this carefully." Patricia said, "Come in tomorrow. Don't move any money. Don't say anything to him, and bring everything you've found." That was in November. By March, Vivian had rebuilt the entire financial picture of her marriage into a document that ran to 47 pages. Patricia reviewed it with 2 colleagues. One of them said, without inflection, that it was one of the clearest asset concealment cases she had seen. Vivian kept going to work. She kept cooking dinner 3 nights a week. She kept asking about Adrian's cases with the same mild interest she had always shown. She was very good at this. Better, she thought, than she had ever been at anything. She felt, during those months, something she could not quite name. Not anger, not grief. Something more like absolute clarity, the kind that comes when you stop pretending not to see. She watched Adrian come home later and later, always with a reason. Dinner with a client, drinks with the partners, a conference call that ran long. She watched him look at his phone in the evenings, with an expression that wasn't quite smiling and wasn't quite not. She watched him become distant and then, strangely, attentive again. A period of perhaps 3 weeks in January, when he brought her flowers twice and suggested they go to a restaurant they hadn't been to in years, and she had gone, and she had sat across from him in that restaurant and thought about the 47 pages waiting in her lawyer's secure file, and she had smiled and said the pasta was wonderful. She didn't know if he was trying to buy goodwill or if something had frightened him. Either way, it didn't change anything. He asked her about the Meridian account in late February. He was in the kitchen when she came home, sitting at the island with a glass of wine and his laptop open, and he said it casually, "The way you mentioned something that doesn't matter. Didn't you say Meridian was renewing the corporate contract this quarter?" "They are," she said, setting her bag down. "Big contract? Significant," she said. "Why?" He shrugged. "Just making conversation." But she saw the way his eyes moved back to his laptop after that, and she had understood for weeks actually, that he was trying to assess her financial position, what she earned, what she would walk away with, whether she had resources he didn't know about. She let him keep wondering. She had, in fact, quietly opened a personal account in her name alone 2 months earlier at a different bank and had begun directing her personal income there. Patricia had advised this. Patricia had advised many things, And Vivian had followed each piece of advice with the same careful attention she had always given to financial systems she wanted to understand completely before touching. In early March, Adrian told her he was going to Montreal for a partners meeting. He would be gone Thursday through Sunday. She said that was fine. She said she hoped the meetings went well. She watched him load his garment bag into the car Friday morning, and she stood in the doorway of their house and she thought, "This is the last time I will do this." She was wrong about the timing. He came back on Sunday night, but she wasn't wrong about the rest of it. She called Patricia on Sunday afternoon. "He's coming home tonight," she said. "How are you feeling?" Vivian considered the question. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the afternoon light coming through the window over the sink. The house was quiet. She had spent the weekend in the kind of deep, unhurried silence she hadn't experienced in years. Reading, sleeping well, cooking a real meal for herself on Saturday night, without measuring how much she made against whether Adrian would want some too. "Ready," she said. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "The notice of application goes out this week." "I know. Have you thought about where you want to stay in the interim?" "I'm staying here," Vivian said. "This is my house too. My name is on the deed. I'm not going anywhere." There was a pause, and then Patricia said, "Good." Adrian came home at just past 9 that evening. He came through the front door and set his bag down and said something about the traffic on the 401. And Vivian said, from the living room, that she'd made extra pasta if he was hungry. He came into the living room and something in her stillness must have reached him, because he stopped and looked at her in a way he hadn't in a long time. Actually looked at her, present, attentive, slightly uncertain. "You all right?" he said. "Fine," she said. "Tired. How were the meetings?" She watched him relax, and she felt something that was not quite contempt and not quite pity. He really hadn't seen it coming. He had spent years moving around her, under her, through the edges of the life they shared, assuming she was doing what she had always done. Keeping things balanced, keeping things smooth, managing the background so that he could stay in the foreground. He had not once considered that the woman who balanced the books might have been quietly building something of her own. He went into the kitchen and she heard him open the fridge, pour a glass of water. He said something about the meeting going well. She said that was good to hear. She went to bed at 10. He stayed up watching something in the living room. She lay in the dark and she thought about the first time she'd taken the train into Toronto alone, at 17, because she had told herself she needed to stop being afraid of things that were only unfamiliar. She had walked around the city for a whole afternoon, not knowing where she was going, just learning the feel of it. She thought she understood now what she had been practicing for. The notice of application was served the following Wednesday. She was at work when it happened. She had arranged to be at work, deliberately, because she had not wanted to be in the house when Adrian received it. Her assistant called her at 2 in the afternoon to say that a man she didn't know had come to the office asking for Adrian and been redirected. Vivian thanked her and said nothing else. Adrian called her at 2:23 p.m. She let it go to voicemail. He called again at 2:41 p.m. She listened to neither message for the rest of the day. She had a client call at 3 and a team meeting at 4. And she was present for both, fully present, because she had decided some time ago that she would not let this become the thing that broke her concentration. She had given enough of herself to Adrian's life. She would not give him this too. She came home at 7. He was in the kitchen, still in his work clothes, a glass of scotch on the counter beside him, and the expression on his face was one she had never quite seen before. Not angry, or rather, something underneath the anger. Something that looked, she thought, like a person who has reached for something he assumed would be there and found only air. "What is this?" he said. Not a question, more like something he was saying to the room. "I think it's self-explanatory," Vivian said. She took off her coat and hung it up. "Vivian, I don't want to have this conversation tonight," she said. "I'm going to make something for dinner. You can eat or you can go out. That's fine with me either way." He said her name twice more. She put water on to boil. What followed was 6 weeks that she would not later describe as easy, but that she would describe accurately as manageable. Adrian tried several different registers. First, he was conciliatory, apologetic in a vague way that carefully avoided specifying what he was apologizing for. Then, when that didn't produce the response he wanted, he became formal, legal, distant. He moved his communications entirely through his own lawyer, a colleague of his at a firm in Toronto, and Vivian was relieved, because it meant she didn't have to be in the same room with him unless she chose to be. He raised the idea of mediation. Patricia told her she didn't have to accept anything that didn't fully account for the assets she had documented. Vivian told Patricia she understood. He raised the idea of a private settlement, no court involvement. Vivian let him wait. He hired a forensic accountant to review the documents she had submitted. The forensic accountant confirmed what she had found, plus one additional account she hadn't known about. Vivian added it to the file. There was a morning in April. She remembered it specifically because the forsythia was blooming in the backyard, and she had looked out at it while she was on a call with Patricia. When Adrian's lawyer made an offer that was, in Patricia's estimation, a reasonable starting point but well below what Vivian was entitled to, Vivian listened to Patricia describe the offer. Then she said, "Tell them we'll see them in court." She heard Patricia exhale quietly on the other end of the line. "I mean it," Vivian said. "I know you do," Patricia said. "That's why I'm smiling." The settlement conference was held on a Wednesday morning in early May at the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. Vivian wore a dark blue blazer that she had bought the previous autumn and worn only once. She had her hair back. She brought the 47-page document and a separate summary she had prepared herself, 11 pages, color-coded. She sat on one side of the table across from Adrian and his lawyer, and she did not look at Adrian more than she had to. She did not need to. She had said what she needed to say already, in print, with documentation, with dates and amounts and account numbers. Adrian was quieter than she expected. She had anticipated a performance. He was good in rooms, good at composure, and she had spent years watching him command spaces with that particular ease of his. But he was quiet. She thought she understood why. There is a certain kind of man who has organized his sense of himself around the certainty that the people around him are not watching very carefully. When the evidence arrives that they had been, for months, for years, the performance requires a different kind of energy than he has available. His lawyer spoke. Patricia responded. Numbers were named. Vivian listened with the same focused attention she brought to everything she chose to look at directly. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they had a settlement. The Oakville house would be listed for sale, the proceeds divided equitably after a full accounting of all assets, including those Adrian had transferred. The condo in the Distillery District, and this was the part Vivian had been most precise about, would be assessed as a marital asset, the funds used to purchase it traceable through the transfers she had documented, and its value factored accordingly. There was a spousal support figure agreed upon. There were terms about professional pensions and registered accounts, and a list of personal property to be addressed separately. Adrian signed at 1:17 p.m. Vivian signed at 1:21 p.m. She shook Patricia's hand in the hallway afterward. Patricia said quietly that it had been her best outcome in a complex financial disclosure case in 3 years. Vivian thanked her. She looked out the window at the end of the corridor. It faced south, and in the midday sun the street below was very bright, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief exactly. Something quieter. The particular satisfaction of a balance sheet that finally reflects what's true. She moved into a rented apartment in Burlington that June, while the Oakville house was prepared for listing. She had 3 rooms and a balcony that faced a park and a kitchen with good light in the morning. Her boxes were practical, well labeled. She unpacked over a weekend with the radio on, a channel that played older music she'd liked in university, and she arranged things slowly, the way you do when you have decided you are going to be careful about what you allow into the spaces you live in going forward. Her mother came to visit in July and brought peach preserves from her neighbor's garden. They sat on the small balcony in the evening, and her mother said after a while that she thought Vivian looked like herself again. Vivian didn't know exactly what her mother meant. She knew what it felt like, though, like a set of books she'd been carrying that she had finally set down and audited properly, line by line, and found that her own column was longer than she'd remembered. She went back to work that September with a new client portfolio and a recommendation from Meridian's CEO that opened 3 new consulting contracts by October. She was 42 years old. She had rebuilt something before, a career, a reputation, the version of herself who got on a train at 17 and walked around a city she didn't know yet. She knew how to do this. She did not think about Adrian often. When she did, it was mostly practical. A document to sign, a date to confirm with the listing agent, a notation in the settlement file. Once in October, she walked past the Hazelton Hotel on Yorkville on her way to a client dinner, and she paused for just a moment outside it, looking at the entrance. She thought about the receipt in the desk drawer. She thought about standing in the kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the backyard. She thought, I always knew how to count. I just forgot for a while that I counted too. Then she went inside to meet her client, and she was, as she always was when it mattered, exactly on time.